Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another patch update. Today we're going to be going through all the patches that just dropped today, and this one's a bit of a doozy because they broke a lot of the game with this one. So first thing they really changed was they added Trapper to Hero Labs, which is a brand new character. We'll probably have a character guide up later this week about how to play the character and such and showcasing them in a match. Same kind of thing I was doing last week with all 6 of the characters they added to Hero Labs, so I'm excited for that because I really enjoy Hero Labs as a mode. Second big thing is they added Quick Buy, which is a feature in a lot of other MOBAs where you're just able to go up to the shop and it'll just automatically buy something for you if you have like a certain build setup. Now they have that in the base. Now they have that in the game, which is really nice to really streamline a lot of those builds and makes it so you could get back in the fight a lot quicker. Other really interesting thing they did with builds is they actually recently added a little thing on the shop that will indicate what people have recently bought. This goes for both teams, so you're able to see what enemies have recently bought and you're able to kind of counterplay against their builds a little more easily, which is pretty interesting. We'll have to see how this really feels in the actual game, but I think that's a pretty interesting mechanic to add to the game, and I'm interested to see how people adjust to it, because I mean currently you could see what people are currently buying anyway, so it's not that big of a change. It just makes it a lot more accessible for people who aren't aware of that kind of mechanic in the game. They added a lot of really small changes in terms of some visual changes, fixing some bugs, and just adding some different things like Viscus has a different melee attack now, which I'm not the biggest fan of currently. It looks kind of goofy and it looks like he's just throwing out like a Minecraft brick or something. It doesn't look great, and it definitely could use a little bit of polish. They also recently adjusted some of the controller support for the game, which is nice because there are a lot of people who play on Steam Deck with this game, and so it's nice to see them actually adjusting a lot of the stuff for the recent keybinds when it comes to going up and down while flying and such. It's good to see. They also recently did a lot of changes to troopers, and so they have like adjustments to how much soul they give. So now in general they give less soul. Generally just adjusting the soul economy of the game right now. They actually nerfed neutral creeps a little bit because they actually just added a bunch of creeps, which we'll talk about in a second. They also changed up the guardians a little bit, so now they're attacking enemy players when they're in a scuffle with another player nearby the guardian, and so the guardian will focus you down a little more and you're not able to dive as easily anymore. They also added and adjusted some of the camps here, and I'm not the biggest fan of where they put them. I don't really like these like top of building camps too much. It's going to be kind of annoying, and I think only some characters are going to get crazy value out of this. I can see something like Lash potentially getting some big value out of these camps and such, but I think they're in such a really hard to reach place that a lot of people aren't going to be as incentivized to go to them, or are going to completely forget about them in general. They also updated mid, so they have these veils that are a lot closer to the ground floor and main entrances of the base, and so now they're just kind of changing the dynamic between like how you approach attacking mid and trying to steal and such, which is pretty interesting in my opinion. I don't think it's gonna be that crazy of a change, but it'll be pretty interesting to see how that changes some of the ways people were engaging with mid in general. They also in general actually buffed mid boss, and so now the trooper health for when the troopers get buffed from the mid boss actually got increased, so that's pretty interesting. They also recently updated the warehouse, and so now the warehouse has been updated a little bit visually in terms of the outside, and the interior looks a little more like this. I actually really like this change. It makes the fights a little more open, especially for an area where you're supposed to drop off urn. It's gonna make stuff feel just a lot more smoother. They also recently updated the little electrical rods and these little spikes, so now you know not to go on those specific rooftops a little more easily now. Before it felt like it wasn't as easy to tell where you could and cannot go on top of. Now this makes it a lot easier to see. There also recently was an update to the hotel through the Halloween patch. I didn't cover it because I didn't know it would happen with the Halloween patch, but there was just this big update that completely changed how the hotel building looked visually, and it's easily one of the best looking areas in the game, and I'm really excited for a lot of the rest of the map assets to be on the level of that specific asset there. It's very pretty, and Greenland is easily one of the best looking places in the entire game right now. Now we're getting on to hero changes, and first thing we're going to see is Abrams had his melee reverted in terms of its attack speed, so now he should have a little more standardized of a heavy melee animation and such, which is pretty nice and is a pretty nice buff to Abram players. They also reverted some other changes in regards to shoulder charge, and so now you can control it just a little better while you're trying to attack people. And seemingly nerfed his passive so he doesn't get as much value out of it anymore. They also fixed another bug in regards to seismic impact. Overall, this is a pretty big W for Abrams players. Bebop once again is getting nerfed. They're doing some changes to the percentages and numbers when it comes to Sticky Bomb. And they also got rid of the disarm when you maxed out his bomb, so that's going to be a pretty big nerf in regards to him silencing some of the gun characters in the game. Overall, I think there's going to be a pretty big nerf to Sticky Bomb. They did add some quality of life stuff like making the cast range for putting it on allies a little bigger, and they also added some damage to his hook. But yeah, it looks like Bebop honestly got hit pretty hard this patch, which I mean, Bebop players have been going through a lot of changes recently. Personally, I don't have much to say in terms of positive things about Bebop in general, so if you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say it. It looks like they did some general changes to Dynamo. It looks like a lot of his power and his singularity in terms of the DPS has been brought down a little bit, and they fixed a couple of bugs. Overall, this isn't going to be the craziest of change to Dynamo, and this isn't going to honestly change where I feel like he's going to be in the tier list very much. Grey Talon is getting some pretty big buffs in terms of his fall-off range, which is going from 22 meters to 58 meters, which is insane and makes him definitely a sniper character. They also are seemingly nerfing the charge shot hitbox, which I don't think is going to have that crazy of an effect on the character, but I could be completely wrong on that. Haze is getting a bit of a rework to her ultimate, and so now it doesn't hit 2 targets, but now she's able to use items during it, and so now she can get some crazy interactions like doing Majestic Leap out of it and doing some pretty insane stuff. I think this character might be a little more meta again. We'll have to see how this is in terms of actually playing her in the game, but right now I'm pretty interested. I can see her being a lot more interesting of a character now. It looks like they also are nerfing Afterburn and his catalyst. It looks like they are also nerfing Infernus's Catalyst and Afterburn, and so now the slow is reduced, and it looks like the build-up per bullet has also been reduced, so that's pretty interesting to see. Ivy is getting some slight buffs, like very minuscule buffs in regards to her Watcher's Covenant. I don't think this is going to be that big of a buffer, but it's nice for the people who really like to play Ivy. They're adding some interesting interactions with Lash where he can now ground strike while on the zipline, which will be pretty interesting. Lash players have been getting really creative with the rollouts, and I think this is just going to add more options to the character. They also added some quality of life to his ground strike, and so now it pulls enemies to the ground with you, which is similar to how Ivy's current stone form works, where it's kind of this like bubble where you can still hit people a little bit above the ground now. That'll be pretty nice for Lash players. Naginna's got some slight nerfs to her mini turrets, and so they're doing less damage and they have less health overall. I don't think this is going to be a crazy change for her. It's just going to maybe make her not shred through objectives as quickly anymore. Mirage got a couple of nerfs. I don't think this is going to be that crazy of a nerf to him, but it looks like they are slightly reducing the lift duration, making his bullet size smaller, and seemingly just taking away a little less power in terms of his tornado. Paradox is getting a bit of a rework to her time wall, and so now it doesn't have charges, the cooldown has been reduced, and seemingly they're reworking some of the power being moved more into her tier 2, and so she has less power in the early game, but about the same-ish power late game. I don't think the time wall charges is going to be that big of a change for her, but we can honestly see. I think honestly the big change that's going to really buff her is the Kinetic Carbine max damage amp being increased, which is going to be really disgusting. And changing some of her ult to be a little quicker now, which I don't think is going to be that big of a change. Overall, I don't quite know what to call this for Paradox. I don't think it's that big of a nerf or a buff really for her. Pocket got a little bit of buffs here, which I am kind of iffy on, where his barrage spirit scaling has been increased slightly and his light melee attack damage has increased slightly. I don't think this is going to be the craziest of buff, but it looks like he's going to get buffed a little bit in lane. Looks like Vindicta is getting a bit of her power from her bullets moved to later in the game rather than earlier, so she's going to have the same overall damage, but it looks like overall they're trying to reduce her damage via boon and such to be a lot less in the early game and more in the late game. They also seemingly are buffing Stake, nerfing Flight so you aren't in the air as much, and are also buffing Crow so she's using it a little more. They're also nerfing Assassinate to be starting at 25% less power. So overall, it looks like she got nerfed a little bit, but I think late game she's going to be about where she was before. Viscus is getting some pretty interesting changes. They're changing the cube so that the regen now scales with Spirit, which might be a buff for him. Gooball is also getting some reworks to his down dash ability, which apparently was part of the tier 3. I don't know how much of a big change that's going to be, but what I do think is going to be really interesting is Gooball now has its size change depending on range upgrades. This might be an interesting buff to Viscus and his ult, and might make him a little more grosser in those smaller areas with Gooball. Warden is getting a little bit of a rework with him getting more sprint and bullet velocity, but it seems that they're going to be nerfing his last stand a little bit. He's not getting unstoppable anymore, and seemingly they're making it so that last stand has a little more risk to it when you're trying to cast it. And so you're going to be waiting on that ultimate just a little more if you're in the middle of it and you get interrupted. Wraith Telekinesis is getting a slight nerf with it taking a little longer to go out and attack someone, and the telekinesis damage has also been reduced slightly. I don't think this is going to be that big of a change, and honestly I don't see her changing very much either. Now Yamato on the other hand got some very big buffs that I think are going to be game changing for her. First of all, Shadow Transformation now affects the grapple time speed, and so she's going to be grappling a little faster now. Shadow Transformation has also been increased in its duration, and big change here, Shadow Transformation no longer prevents death. So she's not going to be able to stand on that sliver of health as much anymore. But they've changed a little bit of the other properties. Now it gives plus 60 bullet and spirit resist, which has been something that I've been wanting a little more, though I do think these numbers could be slightly tweaked because this seems a little bit of an overtune here. And they made it so that instead of her getting that 1% that she could hold on with that sliver, she actually gets 30% of her health back, which is pretty nice. Another pretty big change here is she actually gets an increase in the duration of her Shadow Transformation anytime she gets a kill with it. And so basically, she gets to slightly refresh her ult every time she gets a kill, which is pretty damn cool. Overall, this patch isn't the biggest of patches, and I'm kinda iffy about it. There's been a lot of bugs already reported, to the point where they had to actually remove Warden from the game for a little bit because his ultimate was literally just not coming out. I'm definitely most excited for Trapper and excited to be able to play with the experimental heroes a little more from Heroes Labs, but overall I'm a little more mixed in this patch overall. It came with some good quality of life changes, and I think some of the balance changes weren't too big for some characters, while being pretty immense for other ones. I'm excited for the next patch because I have a feeling they're going to probably drop one of the Hero Labs characters in the main game. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and really helps me boost in terms of the YouTube algorithm. I have a lot of fun making this content, and I just love engaging with the community in terms of discourse, whether it be through comments and just generally hearing out people's reasoning when they disagree with me, or just hearing different perspectives overall. It's super interesting. But for now, this has been Sleep, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye bye!